The ink, a deep and serious blue, was the only splash of color in Elara's monochrome world. Or so it seemed to her on that particular Tuesday afternoon, with London rain sheeting against the window panes of her father's library. The room was a sanctuary of leather-bound logic and the dusty scent of old paper, a fortress against the frivolities of the world outside. Here, Elara Thorne was not the quiet, unassuming daughter of a wealthy merchant. She was a mind unfettered and fierce. Her fingers, stained with the evidence of her labors, danced across a sheet of foolscap, covered in a neat, precise script that was uniquely her own. Before her lay the latest issue of the mathematical repository, and more importantly, the latest challenge posed by its most celebrated contributor, a man known only by his nom de plume, Veritas. For 6 months, their correspondence had been the central axis of her intellectual life. It had begun when she, under the pseudonym Aetheria, had submitted a solution to a particularly thorny problem in differential calculus that had stumped the journal's readership for weeks. Veritas had written a brief, complimentary note on her method, published alongside her solution. A reply from her had followed, questioning a minor point in a recent paper of his on celestial mechanics. His counter-argument had been brilliant, and a dialogue was born. Their letters were a dance of pure intellect. They debated the implications of Fourier's work on heat, deconstructed the elegance of Euler's identity, and sparred over the philosophical foundations of the calculus. In the world of ink and ideas, Aetheria was Veritas's equal, his respected colleague and at times his formidable adversary. Elara had built a portrait of him in her mind, a man of immense patience, wit and humility, whose love for truth surpassed all ego. She found herself, to her own astonishment, falling in love not with a face or a title, but with the beautiful, structured symphony of his thoughts. "Elara, you are not attending." The voice, sharp and polished as cut glass, shattered her reverie. Her aunt, Lady Fitzwilliam, stood in the doorway, a vision in lavender silk and palpable disapproval. "We are due at the Modiste in 1 hour. You cannot possibly mean to go wearing that scholarly shroud," she said, eyeing Elara's simple grey dress as if it were a personal affront. "I am coming, Aunt Agnes," Elara said, swiftly capping her inkwell and carefully blotting her unfinished letter to Veritas. She hid the page within the pages of a hefty volume on non-Euclidean geometry, a hiding place her aunt would never think to violate. "One would think, with the season in full swing and your future at stake, you would show more enthusiasm," Aunt Agnes continued, her tone a well-practiced lament. "You are 21, Elara. Your father's fortune may attract suitors, but it is your duty to secure a title, to elevate our standing. Men do not take a wife to discuss angles and equations." Elara offered a non-committal smile, the shield she had perfected over years of such lectures. She allowed herself to be swept into the whirlwind of preparation, her body submitting to the torturous cinching of corsets and the rustling of silk, while her mind remained in the quiet library, grappling with the elegant proof she was constructing for Veritas. Later that evening at the Granville Ball, the disconnect was more jarring than ever. The ballroom was a cacophony of perfumed air, clinking crystal and inane chatter. Elara stood near a potted fern, a reluctant participant in a tableau of opulent boredom. She watched the glittering assembly, the young ladies preening like exotic birds, the gentlemen assessing them with the detached air of men at a livestock auction. "Ah, Miss Thorne," a voice drawled beside her. "Admiring the foliage? Or perhaps calculating the geometric probability of being asked to dance?" She turned to face Lord Henry Cavendish, the Marquis of Ashbourne. He was, by universal agreement, the most eligible bachelor of the season. Tall, with hair the color of wheat and eyes of a cool, dispassionate gray, he possessed a classical handsomeness that was almost severe. He was also, in Elara's limited experience, one of the most insufferable men in London. "Merely seeking a moment's respite from the quadrille, my lord," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "A common affliction," he said, his gaze sweeping over her with an indifference that felt like a physical chill. "Though I find a surfeit of intellectualism can be just as tiresome. I heard you were discussing planetary orbits with young Pembroke. You quite terrified the poor boy. A lady's mind should be a garden of pleasant thoughts, not a lecture hall." The hypocrisy of his statement struck her with the force of a physical blow. This was the man who, in his latest letter as Veritas, had written with such passionate reverence about the sublime poetry of orbital mechanics. To hear him now dismiss the very subject as unfit for a female mind was galling. "I shall strive to cultivate more weeds then, my lord," she said, her smile brittle. "They are, I am told, far less demanding." His lips twitched in what might have been amusement, but his eyes remained cold. See that you do. It would be a shame for a lady of your prospects to be left on the shelf for want of a pretty smile and a light conversation. He gave a slight, dismissive bow and moved away, leaving Elara seething. How could one man contain such a stark contradiction? The brilliant, respectful Veritas, and the arrogant, condescending Lord Ashbourne, they were two different species inhabiting the same skin. And he had no idea that the learned woman he so casually disparaged was the very same Aetheria whose intellect he so publicly admired. The revelation was a poison that seeped into every interaction. At musicales, while other ladies simpered over Lord Ashbourne's aloof magnificence, Elara saw only the fraud. At soirees, she would listen to him hold court on politics or art, his opinions delivered with a finality that brooked no argument, and she would mentally deconstruct the logical fallacies in his statements, arguments he would never have dared make in a letter to Aetheria. Her correspondence with Veritas became her only solace, a secret life that burned all the brighter for its concealment. His letters arrived like clockwork, delivered by a trusted footman to the offices of the repository and from there, anonymously to her door. My dear Aetheria, one began, your last missive on the nature of prime numbers was nothing short of illuminating. You possess a singular ability to perceive patterns where others see only chaos. I find myself increasingly reliant upon your insights, which shine with a clarity that often eludes my own, more cluttered, thoughts. I often wonder about the mind behind these words. You remain my most valued and stimulating intellectual companion. Elara's heart ached as she read it. The contrast was unbearable. The man who penned these words of deep respect was the same man who, just yesterday, had walked past her in Hyde Park without a flicker of recognition, his attention entirely claimed by the simpering daughters of the Duke of Edgware. A new, dangerous idea began to take root in her mind. It was not enough to simply know his secret. A part of her, a part she tried to suppress, wanted to force a confrontation, to shatter his complacent world. The opportunity presented itself at the annual Royal Society soiree, one of the few events where ladies were permitted, albeit as spectators. Her father, proud of her intellect even if he didn't fully understand it, had secured invitations. The great hall was filled with the country's foremost scientific minds, and Elara felt a thrill of genuine excitement for the first time in weeks. And there, at the center of a group of admirers, was Lord Ashbourne. He was speaking not as a lord but as Veritas. He was presenting a summary of his latest paper. The implications for navigation are profound, he was saying, his voice resonant and confident. By refining this logarithmic calculation one could. He was brilliant. There was no denying it. His explanation was lucid, his mastery of the subject absolute. Elara listened, mesmerized despite herself. This was the man she had fallen in love with. When he finished, a respectful applause rippled through the crowd. As the group began to disperse, Elara found her feet moving of their own volition. She walked directly up to him. Lord Ashbourne, she said, her voice steady. A fascinating presentation. However, I was considering your initial premise regarding the convergence of the series you described. Might there not be an exception in the case of a complex variable, as Cauchy's recent work might suggest? A dead silence fell around them. Lord Ashbourne looked down at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated astonishment, which quickly hardened into irritation. Miss Thorne, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I was not aware you had an interest in such complex matters. I have many interests, my lord. I merely suggest that if you consider the function on the complex plane, the singularity at z equals 0 could invalidate your general claim. His gray eyes turned to ice. He took a step closer, his words meant for her alone. This is not a drawing room game, madam. This is serious science. I would advise you to leave such discussions to those who have dedicated their lives to its pursuit. A little knowledge, as they say, is a dangerous thing. The dismissal was so public, so humiliating, it stole the breath from her lungs. She felt the heat of a dozen stares. He had not engaged with her idea. He had dismissed her and her gender entirely. Tears of fury and shame pricked at her eyes, but she would not let them fall. She merely inclined her head. I see. Forgive my interruption, my lord. I mistook this for a forum of intellectual exchange. My error. She turned and walked away, her head held high, her heart a stone in her chest. The connection was broken. The man she loved did not exist. He was a phantom, a fiction created by ink and hope. The letter from Veritas arrived 3 days later. It felt like a relic from a past life. With trembling fingers, Elara broke the seal. Aetheria. I write to you today with a troubled spirit. I have had a most disquieting encounter that has forced me to reflect on the chasm that often exists between the ideal world of thought we inhabit and the flawed reality of society. I was challenged publicly on a point of my work, a valid and insightful challenge, I might add, by a person deemed by society to be unqualified to hold such an opinion. My response was unworthy. I reacted not to the argument but to the source. I betrayed the very principles of intellectual honesty we hold dear. I confess this to you because your esteem has come to mean a great deal to me, and I feel I have failed not only myself but the standard of our discourse. Have you ever found your own principles compromised? Elara read the letter once, then again, a bitter laugh catching in her throat. The irony was so exquisite it was painful. He was confessing to her about his mistreatment of her. He was seeking solace from his victim for the crime he had committed against her. A storm of conflicting emotions warred within her, rage, vindication, and a heartbreaking flicker of hope. The man she admired was still in there, capable of self-reflection and remorse. But what did it matter? He was remorseful for his treatment of the anonymous Aetheria, while he would continue to treat Elara Thorne with the same dismissive contempt. She sat at her desk for a long time, the blank page before her a judgment. She could reveal herself now. She could write, "The unqualified person was me. I am Aetheria." It would be the ultimate victory, the perfect revenge. She would shatter his world. But as she dipped her pen in the ink, she knew she would not do it. Not like this. Revenge was the impulse of a wounded ego, and what they had built was more than that. Or at least what she had felt was more than that. Instead she wrote, "Veritas, your candor is appreciated and your self-reproach noted. It is a rare man who can admit to a failure of character. You ask if my principles have been compromised. They are daily. We all wear masks in the theater of society. The person you encountered was likely also wearing one, forced upon her by expectations that value her silence over her insight. Perhaps the true failure lies not in a single moment of weakness, but in the system that makes such moments inevitable. Do not reproach yourself for one dismissal, rather question the instinct that prompted it. The mind has no gender." She signed it, sanded it, and sealed it with a firm hand. It was not a declaration of war but a test. She had thrown down a gauntlet, not as Elara to Lord Ashbourne, but as Aetheria to Veritas. She had presented him with the truth, wrapped in the anonymity he cherished. Would he see it? Would he understand? The reply came swiftly, its tone agitated, fervent. "Aetheria, your words have haunted me. The mind has no gender. A simple, profound truth that I, in my arrogance, had forgotten. Your correspondence has been a beacon in a world of intellectual compromise, and you have forced me to look into a mirror and find my reflection wanting. I can no longer continue this dialogue under these false pretenses. The anonymity that once felt like a liberation now feels like a lie. I must meet you. I must know the person who has so fundamentally challenged and changed my perspective. I will be at the Vauxhall Gardens masquerade tomorrow night. I will be wearing a black domino and a silver pin in the shape of an integral sign. Please, I implore you, come. Grant me the chance to apologize not to Aetheria, but to you in person. Yours in hope and humility, Veritas." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The turning point. The masquerade was the perfect venue, a world of disguised identities, where a lady could meet a gentleman without a formal introduction. She could confront him, reveal herself, and see the truth in his eyes. The following evening, dressed in a gown of deep sapphire blue and a silver half-mask, Elara felt a potent mix of fear and determination. The Vauxhall Gardens were a fantasyland of twinkling lanterns, hidden grottos, and the distant strains of a waltz. She moved through the crowd, a ghost in plain sight, her eyes scanning for a black domino and a flash of silver. She found him standing near the famous cascade, slightly apart from the main throng. Even masked, his bearing was unmistakable, the tall, confident posture of Lord Ashbourne. Her breath hitched. He was waiting for her. For Aetheria. She approached slowly, her silk slippers silent on the grass. He turned as she drew near, his eyes, visible through his mask, searching hers. "Aetheria?" he asked, his voice low and hopeful, so different from the cold drawl he used in society. "Veritas," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. He let out a long, shaky breath. "You came. I was not sure you would." He took a step closer. "I am laid bare before you. You know my failings. The man in my last letter? He is not the man I wish to be. Not when I am with you." "And what man is that?" Elara asked, her heart a frantic drum. "A better one. A more honest one. You have shown me a version of myself I did not know existed, A man capable of intellectual partnership, of true respect. I've spent my life surrounded by sycophants and social climbers. In you I found an equal. A challenger. A friend. He paused, his gaze intense. May I see you? Please. This was the moment. Elara slowly raised her hands and untied the ribbon of her mask. She let it fall away. Lord Ashbourne Henry stared. His face went through a rapid, dizzying series of transformations. Confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, a staggering, earth-shattering realization. Miss Thorne? The name was a gasp, a prayer, a curse. It cannot be. You are Aetheria? The unqualified person, she said softly, her voice gaining strength. The lady with the little knowledge. The mind you claimed had no gender, my lord. It was mine all along. He was utterly still, as if turned to stone. The sounds of the masquerade, the laughter, the music, faded into a distant hum. The world had shrunk to the two of them, standing in a circle of lamplight, the truth finally, nakedly between them. All this time, he whispered, his voice raw. The letters, the brilliance, the wit, it was you. And I, my God, the things I said to you. You spoke to Elara Thorne as society expects a lord to speak to a merchant's daughter, she said. And you wrote to Aetheria as one soul recognizes another. I had to know which was the truth. He reached out as if to touch her, then let his hand fall. They are both the truth, he said, anguish in his eyes. I am the arrogant fool you met at the ball. But I am also the man who stayed up all night, wrestling with a problem you had set, filled with an admiration so profound it terrified me. I did not know they could be the same person. I did not know you. Do you know me now? Elara asked, holding her breath. He looked at her, then truly looked at her. Not as an object of pity or a social obstacle, but as he had looked upon the letters from Aetheria, with wonder, with respect, with a dawning, breathtaking awe. I am beginning to, he said. And I see that I have been the greatest fool in England. He took her hand, his grip firm and warm. Elara. Miss Thorne. Aetheria. My apology is a paltry, insignificant thing. It cannot erase my behavior. But please allow me to try. Allow me to court you not as society dictates but as you deserve. As my equal. The mask was off for both of them. The carefully constructed walls of propriety and prejudice lay in ruins at their feet. In their place was something raw, real, and terrifyingly fragile. Elara looked into the eyes of the man who was both her tormentor and her soulmate, and saw only Veritas. She saw the humility from his letters, the intelligence, the capacity for change. Yes, she said, a single simple word that held the weight of 1,000 equations, 1,000 unspoken dreams. You may try. A slow, genuine smile transformed his face, erasing the last vestiges of the cold lord. It was the smile she had always imagined when reading his letters. Then let us begin, he said, and still holding her hand, he led her away from the shadows and into the light. 1 year later. The library at Ashbourne House was even more extensive than her father's, but it was no longer a solitary sanctuary. 2 desks stood facing each other, both littered with papers and books. On one, a silver pin in the shape of an integral sign served as a paperweight. Elara, now the Marchioness of Ashbourne, finished a line of equations and looked up. Her husband was watching her from his own desk, a soft, familiar smile on his face. "A thought, my love?" she asked. "1,000 of them," Henry replied. "But primarily, that I am the luckiest man alive. And that your solution to that problem is far more elegant than mine." "Nonsense," she said, but she smiled. "Your approach had a certain brute force charm." He laughed, a warm, free sound that filled the room. He walked over to her desk, placing a sealed letter beside her. It was addressed to the mathematical repository from Veritas and Aetheria. "Our joint paper is ready," he said. "Shall we change the world of mathematics together, Lady Ashbourne?" Elara took his hand, her ink-stained fingers lacing with his. She thought of the long, winding path that had led them here, of anonymous letters, of public humiliations, of a masked meeting in a garden. They had navigated the scandal of their courtship, the raised eyebrows at a lord marrying a merchant's daughter, and the even greater shock of a lord openly collaborating with his wife on scholarly work. But in this room, surrounded by the quiet hum of intellectual pursuit and the profound peace of a love that had been earned through truth, none of that mattered. "Yes," she said, her heart full. "Let's."